Okay, just an overview on the web interface. I'm showing you some of these things. Even if you use the system before, there may be some things that are not very clear. So I'm talking about login and users, and then configurations that you can use on the system, how to do system backup, and system configuration. So in the installation portion, which I will show only on the last day of the training, you need first to install the software on the system, and then at some point in the installation, you will need to access the web interface to configure it. All right. So to access the web interface, you need to use the management IP, and the default port is 12358. So that's how you access the system by default. This can be changed later. So you can change it to HTTPS or use other ports once you have initially configured the system. When you log into the web portal, it's going to tell you if you're using ProSBC, you will see it up here. Or if you have FreeSBC, you will see it up here. And you will see the version you're running and on which server you are connecting to. If you have just one system, it may be written here, standalone host. If you're connected on the primary system, it will be shown like this. And if you connect on the secondary system, you can do everything as you do on the primary. And the only thing you cannot do on the secondary is to upload a new license or a new software version. Right? So primary or secondary, you can do everything as if it is the primary system. When you get to the, when you log in, then you get to this page. You can see here on the top, you have the status information. So this will give you the total status of the system. Usually you have colors like you will see here, green, but that red or yellow tells you that something is wrong in the system. And you can click on each one of those status to see what is going on. Okay. The other ones here are for management of the system, right? Backups to do some database, well, database, I mean configuration backup, okay? So all the configuration of all the system. Here system is to upgrade to a new version or to activate the configuration. And then below here, you will have all the configurations of this particular system. Okay, so you can choose which configuration you work on, and you can change some parameters for this configuration. If you have another configuration here, maybe configuration 2, then you can have all kinds of different things, different IP interfaces, different servers. So it's good if you want to test different configuration in your system. Other information you get here, you see this one is always system 1, but the date of the system. So a good thing to do on the system is to configure NTP. You can configure your NTP servers in the web interface in services down here. Because it's important to have the right time, especially if you're using call detail records, radius accounting, and radius authorization. It's nice to have the right time on there. And you have an idea here on how many calls are being processed in the system. So you can see how many calls are answered and call rate, okay? Number of calls per second. And the highest, also, you can see the highest. That's useful when you want to see if you have enough licenses on the system. Okay. If you go all the way to the bottom, you have another segment that is called web users. Okay, in web users, what you have is three items. Okay, let me start with the last one, which I don't have any snapshots. By default, we request a high complexity password for the web interface, but you can change that in security settings, and also the delay of keeping the session up. And I like to change that usually to 1 day or 8 hours, so that you don't have to relog in every 30 minutes, because the default is 30 minutes. So you can change that in security settings. Then you can create some web user groups. For example, the default is all open. You can change, modify anything, read, write, and do any change. But you can have, for example, a read-only user, which then you can set all the elements to read. So someone that will log into the system will only be able to see the parameters. He won't be able to change anything. Okay? And then you can choose per element here. Okay? So you have read, write, or no access. If you put no access, then you won't even see the element here on the left side. Then you can create, of course, your web users using this user group you just created. The other thing you have here is the email address. So if you put your email address here in this box, you will be informed if the license will expire. So usually the licenses are good for 1 year. And 2 months before the expiry of this license, you will receive an email. On the email you have input here, and it will tell you that this license will be expiring in 2 months. Okay. Then we have the configuration section. Okay, so in the configuration section, what you have is one or multiple configurations. So the default one is config one. So when you log in the system the first time, you will have just one configuration. But it's a good practice to copy the configuration so that you have a backup here. And I will show you how to use this in a minute. Okay. But right now, to choose the configuration you are using right now, you need to make sure that it's the one here on the right side, which can be different than the active one, which you will see here. All right, so the active is shown here and all the other configurations are here. Now, if you choose here another configuration, well, this one will still be the one active and you will be modifying this other version. All right, so you just need to be careful and know what you're doing here. You see also when the last time it was updated and the last time it was activated. Okay, so you see that it was almost done at the same time here. And you can see that config one here was only activated in 2018. So you know it's pretty old here. Okay, so these updated, what does it mean is when you do create a new entry in the configuration, or if you save any of these configuration, then it will mark it as updated. And when it's updated, you will also see there's a star like this that appears on the left side here. Okay. Activated means that you have applied the configuration on the system. To use configurations, one way to use it is like this. So you start with your config A, so your main configuration, which is active. And then you can go and modify your configuration. All right, so you modify this configuration. Maybe, I don't know, you add a new call route in the system. And then you validate this configuration. And then it tells you that it is good. So if you validate it and you know it's good, then you can say load new configuration. And it's going to apply this new configuration. And it will become the new active configuration. Right? And your modifications you have done are now active on the system. The thing here is that if you modify the configuration A and you make a mistake, okay, then when you validate the configuration and it says, well, there's an error in your configuration, then you cannot activate this configuration. So if you try to activate it, it's going to stay on config A, right? And you need to fix now this configuration because it will still be config A, but with errors inside. Right? So it will not have applied the changes, but it's still on config A with errors. Right? So you need to go and change the configuration so that it becomes good again. So the risk in doing this is that you don't know what has changed. Right? And you don't know how to go back to the previous configuration. So one way to do that is to use the audit logs. Right? So you can go in the audit logs and you know what was changed in the system. And the other way is to just undo the changes if you know which one were done. Okay? So, but sometimes it could have been done by someone else, so you don't know easily. So you need to do the audit log. So that's one way to do it. And if you're very comfortable with the system, it's very easy because usually the reload configuration will tell you, well, there was an error in this part of the configuration. So you can just go remodify it and revalidate it. Then it's going to be good again. Okay, so that's normally what we do in support. We just update the configurations because we know what we do. When you change the configuration live in the system, it will only apply the new changes that you have done. Right? So it won't stop the calls that are going. It won't affect other parts of the system. It will just apply the new configuration, and any new call that comes in will use this new configuration. Okay? So the other way to do this is instead of using and modifying configuration A, you copy this configuration in another one, right? So for example, config B, which is exactly now config A and config B are the same. And then what you do is just modify the configuration B. And then you can validate this configuration. And then when it's ready, you can activate configuration. It becomes the new active configuration. Okay. Now this is very safe because you can validate here before, and you don't get any errors on the system. And if you have errors, then it will be automatically blocked here, right? You won't be able to do anything else after. Okay. So that's a good way to do it. And if there's a mistake, you have all your time to fix it. And if you can't find a mistake, then you can just recopy the configuration here and start again. Okay. The other advantage here is that you can do all those changes here, validate it, and verify if everything is okay in the daytime, and then just do the activation here on the nighttime. All right, so in the night, you just go and you activate, everything was tested and it works. All right, so it's very, very safe to do something like this. Okay. So then maybe you will be having a lot of those configurations in the system, and you can delete the older ones if you don't, if you know you won't need them anymore. But in our test systems, in our lab, we have a lot of configurations in the system to test all kinds of scenarios, and that's no problem. Okay. So now we have a backup of the systems. Okay, so copying configuration is good. However, it's all in the system. Okay, so if you have a standalone system and that system becomes unavailable for some reason, well, you lost all the configuration. So the way to protect against that is to do a system backup. So if you click on the backup tab I showed you before, you will create a backup of all the system. But there are a few things that won't show up in the database backup. For example, the management IP is not included in the backup, right? Because the management IP is configured independently in the system. So, so it's not stored in the database. Right? The same thing is the product key. Right? So the product key is attached to the hardware of the system. So it's not in the database. Same thing for the licenses, right? Yeah. Okay. But for example, if you restart the system, you can upload the database on that system. And if it has the same information here, then you can have the same configuration on that system. So to create a database backup, you just need to click on here, create new database backup. And this will create a new file up here in database backup. The name is always something like this, right? Toolpack and the version and the date, but you can rename it to make it something more useful for you. You can also download this database backup, and that's the main goal of this, is getting this configuration out of the system so that you can reuse it later. Okay. So if you want to restore this database backup, well, you take the file that you have downloaded out of the system and you just upload it. It will show up here in manual database backup. You need to do here validate. So when you click on validate, it will start recovery. So we'll start validating the database backup. Once it's validated, then you'll be able to recover it by clicking here. Okay. When you recover it, you have to be careful because it will overwrite all your configuration and replace it with that system configuration. So you need to make sure of what you're doing when you do this. Okay. But this is a good way to protect against failure of a system. Okay. So I mentioned quickly before the system status. Oh, let me go back. There was a question here. Yeah, okay. So the database backup can be loaded on another system. It can be loaded on another system. There's a few things you have to be careful though, is that the network ports have to be the same. Okay, so for example, if you have one LAN and one WAN port and you want to reload on a system like this, well, you need to have the same LAN 1 configuration. So when you install the system initially, you need to have the same LAN 1 information. You need to have also your product key available and the licenses. Okay. But the rest is, well, the license, you can get it from the license server, okay, once it's installed. but you can recover the system, another system with the same backup. In the system status here, you can see overview of different elements here. Okay, so system is the overall. I talked about this already earlier on today. There is calls here, which is more information. Here we have basic call information, but if you go in calls here, you get more information about calls on the system. Host here, you can do all kinds of things. For example, you can see the performance of the host server, the CPU usage, memory usage, these things. You can restart the server. You can upload new Linux packages. So we will talk about that later. SIP here, you get some information about SIP stack and SIP registrations. We'll go through that later. Network access point here, you can see if the network access points are up or down, if they're available to make calls and receive calls or not. If you're using Radius, we'll talk about that also later this week. If you have Radius, you need to configure Radius server in the system, and you will see if they are available here. SBC, it's gonna give you the state of the SBC. Is it running normally? Is it sometimes you see, what is it called? It says SBC performance to be verified. Or you can be also in DDoS attack, okay? And these things you will see here. If you have configured a domain name server, you will see it here. And then if you have certificates for SIP TLS, you will see if they are valid here. So we'll go through some of these status in the specific, in each of the specific functions of the system. So system configuration here, so you can see you need to choose your specific configuration. And then each of these will have different configuration options. So let me just go through some of them. Here, if you want to go in the IP interfaces, right, that's where you need to go. Configure the IP interface. So this is, for example, all the IPs that will be used in your system, how you can reach the SBC from other SIP calls. I talked about also host actions. So you can go here to reboot the server and do things like that and control some of the applications. So throughout this training, I will be talking about applications. So the SBC itself is not just one application. It's a list of smaller applications to control different portion of the system. And in here, you can control, for example, the trace level of these applications and other functions. Okay. I'll show you this later. If you are using SIP here, but if you're doing a SIP registration, then you need to configure SIP domains and maybe SIP registration filtering. If you're using SIP TLS, then you need to configure also certificates and TLS profiles. Okay? So all the portion of SIP will be configured here. And then you have network access points. So these are SIP networks, how you can reach those SIP networks. Then you have some settings in the network access points. And Profiles are also attached to network access points. So you have additional parameters you can configure for NAPs in the profiles. And you will see it's pretty extensive. So we'll go through this when we work on the SIP, IP network and SIP configuration. Down here you have call routes. So if you want to do call routes, you need to go here. If you need to use routing scripts, you will go down here. The routing scripts we will talk about in the routing section on day 3. In gateway here, what you have also is if you want to enable call detail records, and there's a few other tricks you can do here. So you can select this at this section of the configuration. If you need to use domain names, then you need to configure a domain name server. You just need to be careful with the domain name server. There's some confusion with because when you configure the Linux host on the system, because we're running CentOS 7 as a base OS on this, and if you run CentOS on there and you have a domain name server, that's the one that is being used for the Linux server. And you have another one that's being used here for the SIP stack. And it needs to be configured here. So I will explain this again later, but just be careful. You know, there's 2 places where we configure a domain name server. Then here you have data about the SBC. Most of the time here, you don't need to work in this portion of the system. Everything is handled automatically. However, if you want to create manual rules, you can go in here and configure manual rules in the system. And you can see SBC status also here. In the advanced networking, you have the network address translation. This is where you configure the local and remote net I was explaining before. Sorry. And then you also need to configure the services. For example, if you want to use SNMP, this is where you need to configure it. If you want to change SSH ports, HTTPS ports, you can go here. And also, if you want to configure NTP or just manually set the time, you can go here. So I mentioned in this portion of the system, you have the routing scripts. So if you want to create a custom script, you will want to go here. And for example, one of the script that is used by many customers, we call it label routing. And label routing is configured in the routing scripts here, and also uses another section that's called route set, which allows us to manipulate a series of numbers, and each of those numbers can be routed to a different destination. All right, so by using the label routing, you can have millions of numbers being routed to hundreds of destinations. Okay. Also in routing scripts, sometimes you can create custom columns, okay? Either custom NAP columns or, sorry, custom route columns. And these are configured either here or here. And one example of a custom NAP column is a priority. So in a specific NAP, you can set a priority compared to another NAP in the system. Okay, you can also have priority in the routes. So you can put a priority before one route to have higher priority than another route. So it can be per route or per network access point. Okay. And then if you have a custom script, then you can add more values here. We've done one recently where we add a trunk group. Okay, so you add a NAP column of a trunk group. And then when you receive a call, it includes in there the trunk group, and then we can select NAPs according to the incoming leg trunk group. Okay. So these are examples of what we can do here. If you use Radius, then you have Radius server configuration. And you can use it for authentication or accounting. Okay? So for authentication is you can first validate if a call is accepted. Second, you can also use the Radius server for creating routing tables. So you receive a call, you send it to the Radius server, which is not owned by TechBridges. Okay? So we do have partners that provide some Radius servers, or some of our customers also have done their own Radius servers. So if I repeat, we receive the incoming call, we send it to the Radius server for authentication, and they return us the call is accepted. Or if it's used for accounting, so these are call detail records. So you receive a call in the system, and when the call is made, we send information to the accounting server saying that the call has been accepted and it is being connected. And then when the call ends, it's going to send another request to the Radius accounting server. So if I repeat, there's two ways to do call detail records. One is using the Radius server, as I just explained. The other way to do call detail records is just to keep them and store them locally on the system. Well, on the file system of the SBC. If you use a special routing script here, you can also upload special files in the system. And then we use the file DB to upload those files. So when we talk about the routing scripts, we will show when these file DBs are used. And we talked about playing in the system. So if you want to play files, you can use this to upload audio prompts in the system. Okay, so you can do it with this web interface, or you can push them with SFTP in those systems. Okay, then there's a last section on the bottom, which is called maintenance. So to install a license, well, initially when you get into the system, the first thing you need to do is put the license. So you need to go there and activate your license, and then you can also later update the license, or you can install a new software version. All right, so that's where you will go to upload the new version on the system and install it. Uploading a new package on the system can be done while the system is running. That's no problem, okay? You have also logs where you can get here. Either audit logs, which I talked about earlier on. So you can see everything that was changed in the system. You can see which user and what element was modified in the system. So I will show you some examples of that on day 3. And then you have other system logs, which you can view from the web interface, or the best way usually is to get a TB report. So you can click on report here, and then this will capture all the logs of the system for a specific day, and it will zip all of that, and you will get one file with all the logs Usually, when you report a problem to us, we will ask you to provide a DB report so that we get all the logs of what happened in the system. Okay. Sometimes we will also ask you to get a change the application trace level so we get more details on some of these applications. All right. So for example, if it's a routing problem, we can ask to get put gateway application at trace level 1, and then you do a TB report, and when you do the TB report, it will capture this application at trace level 1 with the details we need to debug the system. As we go through this presentation, I will also tell you in each of the module which applications we want to use for debugging. All right, so you will see which ones are important for which type of services. Call trace, for sure, if you have used the system, you have gone to call trace. This will give you a live call trace of what is going on in the system. You see the calls incoming in the system and which route have been chosen for outgoing call. So, and you can see, you can also export those call traces so they can be studied later. You can export them as HTML files, right? So it's very, very useful to debug. You can see also if the call and calling number were changed, what is the call ID that was used for this call, which IPs were used, the SDP, and everything. Okay. So it's very useful for debugging. And then you have test call. Test call is a function that allows you to create outgoing calls or simulate incoming calls. Right? So when you use test call to make a real to make a test, then this makes a real call out to a destination. Okay. So it's useful for testing if the remote side will answer the system without having to pick up a phone and do a test. Okay. Like I said, test call, you can also simulate the incoming call. So when you simulate the incoming call, the call is like it goes in the system, it goes through the routing scripts, through your routing table, and then it will select the route according to all the configuration you have done. So that's very useful also to test your routing script, your routing table, your regular expressions, and you can use this for doing your test calls without having to do a real call on a phone. Okay. So I see there were some questions there. Okay, for radius authentication, can it be configured per NAP? So only some NAPs need radius authentication. Okay, so what we for radius, okay, we have one or even multiple routing scripts. So you need to have a routing scripts to enable radius authorization. Our default implementation is that every single call goes to the radius server. All right, but this is not difficult to change. Okay, so it's easy to change. What I would do is just put a new NAP column, which would say maybe do authorization or do authorization, something like that. And then in our script, well, each of the NAP will then be say yes or no. Okay? And then in the routing script, we will verify if do authorization, then do radius, or if not, well, then just use the routing table. So we don't have this script right now, but it would be easy to do. Okay. Does that answer your question? Okay. Then, what's the question? Where do we, yes, okay, where do we configure SMTP settings? On the web portal or on the server itself using postfix? Can we store SIP signaling and pick up as okay? The SMTP settings, okay, let me answer the second question first. Can we start signaling and PCAP passively? The answer is yes. So I will show how to do that later, but I'm not sure, Sharad, about the SMTP settings. What do you need this for? Okay, email alerts. All right, so the system, the SBC itself doesn't do email alerts except for the licenses. Okay, so if there's a license that will expire, it will send an email, but otherwise it will not send an email. The SMTP service for that email is stored in our license server. Okay, so when you enter your email address in the SBC, this is relayed in our license server, and that's where our SMTP settings are set. Okay, so there's no SMTP settings on the SBC itself. The other thing that the system can do is if you use SNMP, then you have SNMP get maybe on the system, and then or SNMP traps, and then if you feel that there's an alarm on a specific condition, then on your SNMP server you would need to have your email as SMTP on there. Okay. What else? How to test the DTMF for both sides. I'm not sure what you mean by that. Is if the DTMF are passing from one side to the other using maybe, I don't know, RFC 2833. The only way to know if the DTMF are passing on our side is to do a RTP capture on the system. Okay, so otherwise the RTP will just pass end to end, and the SBC will not do anything about those specific DTMF packets. Okay, but we can see them passing if we capture a RTP capture. And to do RTP capture, we have to go in the TB router application and use the capture tool. Okay. And we have this described on the wiki, and I will also show this to you, how to do this in the next few days. Okay. Does that, okay. Thank you, James. Okay. Do you have other questions on these two modules that I've just presented? Yes, there is another question. Is there any API to get call status, NAP status, so I can create our own dashboard? The answer is yes. Either you use SNMP, okay, which can be integrated in the system, or you use the RESTful API. So the RESTful API is, these are HTTP requests using a JSON format. And when these requests are sent, you can get NAP status, call status, number of calls on the NAP, number of calls on the specific, on all the system. And you have a lot of information you can get from the system. Okay. But I'm guessing most of the people are using SNMP to do that and not the RESTful API. But you can also get it on both ways. Okay. Anything that is accessible from the web portal can also be used by the RESTful API. SNMP has a more limited set, but it's enough for doing everything you want in the monitoring space. Okay, RESTful API is used most for configuration. Okay. Okay, any more questions? Okay, so what we'll do now is we'll take a break. Okay, let's meet up again in about, yeah, the hour. Okay, in about 15 minutes, about the hour, and we'll continue with the next module, which is software and licensing. All right, everyone?